Hey, it's close to that time of year again. It's coming up to November, and it's time to rock the vote. You heard Rock the Vote by Carcass from their Swansong record. And I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And welcome again to Requiem Metal Podcast. And as we approach Halloween here in the wee hours, and as we approach presidential, not presidential, but the midterm elections.
Midterm elections,
and,
yes.
Mayoral elections, governor elections, gubernatorial yes. Elections, to be proper. A song like Rock the Vote is an appropriate way to start things off. But have no fear, listeners. This is not a political themed show. It's a show devoted to some of the odder niceties of the Jeff Walker, Ken Owen land, I guess.
Yeah.
With a little Bill Steer thrown in.
We did, I think, episode 30 or something.
Yeah,
it was a while ago.
A long time ago.
We did a selected Carcass show, which is basically just kind of like our favorites. But this one, we're going to actually go into some territory where people either love it or hate it or are completely indifferent. So we thought we'd show how much we enjoy it.
I think one of the problems Mark and I have is, how to approach some of the bands that we essentially, like Iron Maidens, the Slayers, the Napalm Deaths, the bands that are kind of the cornerstone of extreme metal in a certain way, or just metal in general. Yeah. And so, if we can take a left of center approach to this, and I think this is a good one. And we did do a Tonelli Jarva show. That's true. Which that's not how you pronounce it all. We actually got a very thoughtful email from do you remember
Finn.
The pronunciation then?
I can't pronounce it. I'm American. I know how to speak English, and I don't understand phonetics.
Maybe it's like Yarva or Yarva.
There's like an extra syllable in there someplace. I think that nobody.
Yeah, I have no idea. I'm not gonna
Yarva or something.
I do know that Hungarian and Finnish in a Pepsi taste test are the two most difficult modern languages to learn to speak.
I believe
so.
More so than like Japanese or
because they don't have roots in anything else. They're sort of like independent of.
They're not Germanic languages.
No, they're not Germanic or Latin based or anything else. So
what's wrong with this?
There's
people?
Like a lot of weird
socialists,
freaking tribal weirdos that came over centuries ago. But no, we love the Finns. We love the Hungarians. Budapest is one of my favorite cities. But anyways, epiphany came in the shower when I was listening to Blackstar the other day. And
which, those who don't know, Blackstar was the 1997 Post-Carcass outing minus Bill Steer, and they brought over Carlo Regala, I believe. Regatas from
Swansong.
Who was on Swansong.
Yep.
And they also brought over Mark Griffiths from, also known as Griff, who's on the first two Cathedral, the first Forest of Equilibrium from Cathedral and Soul Sacrifice.
I think so, Soul Sacrifice. And, so I was listening to Blackstar, and I kind of had this epiphany, like, you know what? Swansong from Carcass never really gets its due, nor do some of those songs that appear on Wake Up and Smell the Carcass that were kind of the B-sides. And
it's funny to think of B-sides of Swansong. Yeah. Some people might think, oh, really? There's worse than that? Really?
Yeah, okay. But then we'd never really have enough ammo to really do a Blackstar show itself. So how do you
intellectually justify this?
Yeah, how do you do all this? And so I thought this is a great way to do it. It's kind of like a hidden Megadeth show or something.
And Blackstar is one of those bands that many people, I think it was all contingent on when it came out. Yeah, people were still a little butthurt after hearing Swansong when they thought it should have been Heartwork Part 2. Yep. I mean, there's the whole thing with they were on Columbia. Swansong was supposed to be the first Columbia release, the proper Columbia release for Carcass, and then it got shelved for I think 2 years almost. Yeah, and then Earache eventually ended up putting the thing out, and now it's got a little bit more.
Well, and by the time too they put it out, Carcass was breaking up as a band. I mean, the production of Swansong basically destroyed the band. Like they ended up they could go no further. But anyways, go ahead. You were saying about the aging
I think in Blackstar, I think since it came out right after Swansong was released, or pretty a year and a half or something after that, people want to hear Symphonies of Sickness Part 2 or Necroticism Part 2, and it's not going to happen. I mean, these people mature, and I think if Blackstar would have come out say in 2002. I think it would have had a totally different reception than it did coming out in 1997.
Yeah, because it would have come out in the midst of sort of that stoner rock revival that was kind of...
And it's basically, it's rock and roll. It's got a bunch of Zakk Wylde-isms. It's got, somewhat like Cream riffs in it. It's, it's kind of... And then with Jeff's, lack of singing ability, which he kind of embraces wholeheartedly on this record, where he's actually like holding out notes. And you mentioned it almost had like a sentenced vibe to the guy that can't sing, but he's trying to almost adapt like pop sensibilities to death metal vocals.
Yep, in the same way, and similar to what Jarva or whatever, how you pronounce it, does with the Black League. Another one of his bands where he's doing just all kinds of attempts at singing, like well, but it obviously doesn't come off. And it has definitely its appeals in that it doesn't work. It's rough around the edges in all the right kind of ways. And Walker's kind of taken that even further with his solo record a few years back, the Carcass Country. Which had what were the couple of the cover songs they did? Oh my gosh!
There's a bunch. I mean, there's a bunch of like classic country stuff on there, and I forget what else was.
Oh, don't just dropped in to see what condition my condition is in. The Kenny Rogers Big Lebowski song. So but if you don't understand that Carcass always has had a sense of humor, you and I were talking about this earlier, then you're kind of missing part of the point. I mean, one of the things they were doing on those early records is they were a bunch of vegans and they were writing like these gore lyrics.
It was social commentary. There's no different. I mean, you go back and listen to some of the old interviews where they were very kind of ardent about all this stuff, and it's like, human meat is no different than animal meat and all this kind of shit. But they actually did have more of they've always had a sense of humor about everything. And then when it's a little bit more apparent in the lyrics, especially on Swansong, the lyrics are so, even like Heartwork had, stuff that it was a little bit more veil. It wasn't all just done in medical terminology. But it had a little bit, had the veil of medical terminology, but then putting like actual, commentary on personal issues.
No love lost and things like that,
which kind of works. But then when Swansong came out, it was so much more just almost like straight rock and roll lyrics.
Yeah. I mean, Rock the Vote's pretty obvious what it's talking about. I mean, it's really, talking about, corrupt governments and different things like that, and just like how,
which kind of goes back to his roots in electro hippies.
Yes, it does. The sort of crusty, hardcore kind of roots,
punk stuff,
that kind of works. But Swansong is a record that I, was kind of near and dear to my group of friends, because we were still in high school when this came out, and so
you heard this.
We weren't so jaded by extreme metal.
Had you just heard Heartwork and then this?
Yeah, I mean, we may have heard. Well, I think I heard Symphonies on cassette tape, kind of in the midst of this, but I didn't own.
But you
Symphonies.
hadn't like followed the journey with them, so you weren't like so invested that if they changed their sound at all, you'd be like.
I mean, it sounds weird to say this, but we probably heard Symphonies before we even heard Necroticism. I mean, back in like 95, 96, you didn't just walk into a record store and Necroticism was like sitting there. It just wasn't. Heartwork had a certain amount of oomph behind it because of the Columbia deal and stuff. And because at the time we were starting to get into extreme metal in like 94, the Heartwork videos were on MTV, No Love Lost, especially Heartwork was all over the place. And so, we were really, really tuned into that. And I just don't think any of us went back and were able to like readily find Necroticism. And it's not like today where you just like pop on Amazon and just hit one click and it's there.
Well, even back in the day, it was, we got Necroticism within the year it came out. So there was like an import section that they got everything Earache did for the year, but it wasn't, they didn't have like a full back catalog.
And they probably weren't restocking it a lot if you bought some.
I mean, it probably pieces, sold like 6 copies in the town.
And so, anyways, I went from Heartwork to Swansong. I was pretty pumped about Swansong because I bought Swansong. That was the first Carcass record that I bought like day of release kind of thing, like where I was waiting for it to come out. And, there were all these stories about the delays because of production and different things like that. And so, when it came out, I could appreciate it for what it was. And I kind of saw that it was an evolution in a sense. And, we were not opposed to sort of like early mid-90s Megadeth either, which is where there's a lot of like those kind of riffs that show up on.
Well, I think kind of your generation, or not. I guess generation is a 10-year thing. But your generation, your high school generational kind of thing, I think was one of the first eras where people started to not worry about genre so much. When I was going to high school in the early late 80s, early 90s, it was very, your hardcore punk, your metal, your rap. There was not a whole lot of crossover except for the whole, skateboarder thing where, we'd listen to Ice Cube and NWA, but it wasn't like, there's still these very stringent rules. Like, okay, well, Carcass is this; they cannot do anything else but this.
Yeah,
that was kind of the mindset.
Well, like '96, I'm sitting around listening to Carcass and Tiamat and Tori Amos and Dr. Dre and I mean, it just didn't matter. You're right. The degenerification of all that. Nail Bomb. I mean, just whatever we're in the mood for and stuff. And so I didn't really kind of have that. You're right. That sort of disillusionment with Swansong that some people did. And I don't think people
I didn't either,
outright hated it, but I think, I guess there were probably some people that just outright hated it, but
it did not get very good reception.
Yeah.
I mean, people after Heartwork was kind of like their quintessential moment. I mean, as far as having underground cloud and still having some kind of mainstream success, I guess. And then when Swansong came out, it seemed like a half-hearted attempt, I think, for a lot of people. But I really didn't have a problem because I was jonesing just to have more Carcass. I mean, in some form of some,
even kind of milder or mellower versions of Carcass is still Carcass. You know what I mean? It's still better than.
And really,
most.
I was saying earlier that I think a lot of these songs, if you would have had different lyrical content. No, and you could have thrown these on Heartwork, and nobody would have known the difference.
Yeah,
on some of the songs, not all of them, but
I mean, and some of them are bringing in still very metal influences. They're just a little bit new. Like Rock the Vote has very much a new wave of British heavy metal, like Iron Maiden kind of vibe to it. I'm almost power metal, but then not in the lame sense, but old traditional early '80s power metal kind of feel to it. Epic. But Heartwork had some of those kinds of moments on it where it was
solos and stuff too.
Very inspirational, epic, going
kind of major chord kind of upbeat or triumphant sounding, and a lot of this stuff is I think the pace of it as well. I don't think there's any blast beats on the entire thing.
No, it's pretty mid-paced.
It's incredibly mid-paced. It's Megadeth pace.
Yep.
Totally.
Yeah. It's mid
'90s and Megadeth.
I was gonna say it's not Rust in Peace like Speed. Yeah. It's definitely Countdown to Extinction, Euthanasia, which were records I grew up with that you were not a fan of. Yeah, and that's fair, but it's just
I only like one Megadeth record, and that is Rust in Peace.
It's a weird record, but Rock the Vote was one of the more popular songs on here, but then Keep on Rotting in the Free World and Generation Hexed, I remember, were kind of maybe the Concrete Corner sample songs.
I think Room 101 was also got some kind of radio players on one of those samples.
Yeah, I just know that was kind of our standbys, and then Tomorrow Belongs to Nobody, which is ironic because I don't think we're playing any three of those songs because it's those are songs I've heard so much that I can bash my head with it, but I don't know. I mean, do you think this record has aged well?
I think so. I have no problem. I mean, I think a friend of ours is actually pretty fond of this record.
Monica is really, really
who's, she's in her
she's mid 24, 25.
Yeah. But incredibly voracious appetite for learning about metal, which is I find kind of rare, especially a historical approach.
Oh yeah.
So I think I don't think people have the same kind of baggage that a lot of the older metal fans do with it.
And it's slick, it's
another Colin Richardson production.
It lacks, I think, some of the dimensionality and complexity of the solos because you've replaced Mike Amott with more of a traditional, kind of bluesy, traditional metal solo.
I think he was. I think Carlos was actually a guitar tech for them.
Oh, was he?
I believe so.
Is that what it was?
It was something like that.
Well, and we've sort of noticed that he likes to do a lot of the Zakk Wylde pinch harmonic type stuff.
Especially on some of the Blackstar stuff we're going to be playing. It's wow, yeah.
But I mean, again, I think it holds up well. It's a fun record to listen to. It's a good driving record,
I mean, it's upbeat.
Yeah,
which all Carcass records, they're not really downtrodden. They're more pissed. Some are more angry than others, but they're never wallowing in themselves at all.
But this is sort of the record you can put on when you don't really want to think too much about what all the complexity of symphonies where it's this collision of sound happening in every song. I mean, this is sing along,
it's catchy
kind of stuff,
So. It's using traditional rock and roll structures to
absolutely
with a tiny little injection of death metal.
Yeah. And where we're going to head next with Swansong is, I think it would be appropriate to open up the next set with the namesake of the follow-up to Swansong, which is Blackstar. I don't know if this is the sole inspiration for them naming the band Blackstar.
Oh, it actually was.
Was it? Just
I was doing a little bit of research beforehand, and actually the the band was named after the Carcass song Blackstar.
Any particular reason? Just I
don't know. Maybe
sounded good.
It's kind of an evocative name. I guess it doesn't necessarily pigeonhole you in any one thing.
There's great. Blackstar is also the name of a fantastic Radiohead song on the Bends.
Blackstar is also a terrible Filmation cartoon from the 80s.
I do remember Blackstar.
Fucking boring as shit. I haven't. But and then eventually when the version of Blackstar that you have is actually called Blackstar Rising because there's some conflict with
a hip hop band called Blackstar. And we'll get into all that stuff later. Kind of funny. But we've got Blackstar, which is definitely a mid-pace, probably one of the heavier songs. The opening riff on Blackstar is one of my favorites, I think, on the record. And then we got Child's Play. And one thing I'll say about Child's Play is this is a song that, like, the use of sort of like feedback and like the sort of drop down, like really like deep bass kind of parts and stuff like that. It has an atmosphere to it that's unique to Carcass. You never heard like sort of where everything sort of drops out and just like the bass just sort of builds it back into like
the bass never had any kind of presence.
Yeah, and it was
just there to fill space.
It's totally there on a tune like Child's Play. And then we got Polarized and Firm Hand, and we'll talk a little bit more about those tunes when we come back. So enjoy a set of Swansong from the resurrected era of Carcass and Jeff Walker, Ken Owen land. So Blackstar, Child's Play, Polarized, and Firm Hand. There's Firm Hand, Polarized, Child's Play, Blackstar from the Swansong record. And Firm Hand, that may have been a song that we actually played on the Carcass like favorites. I think I may have picked that song as one of my favorites.
That's actually, that riff is very Heartwork-esque, almost Necroticism-esque, actually.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and there's really cool things like in that song, you know, when they come into the acoustic part and like the very like almost like 80s metal bluesy kind of solo, the wee.
Yeah, it was kind of like, unlike anything they ever did, but it still kind of fit their aesthetic. You know?
Well, and Ken Owen does like kind of these weird like little blasts. They're like not quite blast beats, but he's kind of like
fake cymbal.
Yeah, he's kind of playing with some stuff there. And then Polarized is a cool tune. You know, it's kind of plays off of a poetry pattern. You know, Please Tell Me. Or no, not Please Tell Me. It's the same repetition of the lyric, and I'm drawing a blank, of course. And he says it over and over again in the song. You know, don't want your number, don't want your name, don't want your color, don't want your politics, don't want your cause. Mm-hmm. You know, it's pretty cool. You know, it's just kind of an angry, venomous kind of song. You know, not only directed towards politics, but I think it's also very directed towards corporate stuff. You know, and one of the songs we were going to play was "I Told You So." Corporate rock really sucks, which is a B-side from you know, other songs that recorded at the same time that they recorded the Swansong sessions, and it ended up showing up on Wake Up and Smell the Carcass, which was a really fantastic collection. If you don't,
it came out in '97, I believe, and it's got basically just a bunch of B-sides and rarities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's got some BBC songs. It's got some of the stuff from a few of the EPs that they did. A lot of
the Heartwork EP,
things.
A lot of stuff that was actually really hard to find, and I think at this point, you know, just hearing interviews, the Carcass has basically released everything they've ever recorded now.
Yeah,
except for maybe like Micah Mott said he has like weird demos versions of stuff, but you know, as far as like I don't think there's really a Carcass song nobody's heard now.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, you know, Carcass fans are so like voracious in terms of like their appetite for finding all this stuff. I mean, I think I have even on my computer some like Carcass live bootlegs. One's called like First Early Show. It sounds like
I've got the BBC sessions that sound terrible, but you know, I've got
it's
all
Carcass.
that. And, exactly.
So it is what it is. But yeah, it's the Swansong sessions from February through April '95 is when they recorded this. You know, so it took a long time for this record to come out eventually. You know, but it's got the Tools of the Trade and stuff from the Grind Crusher compilation. So it's a really neat thing, and it kind of came into a little bit of controversy as well because of the cover with the
JFK autopsy photo.
Yeah, you know, which was banned. And I have the wonderful actual artwork to disturbing for public display version.
Yeah, I've got just a regular one.
Which actually I kind of like this one. I like that it has this on it because
at least it doesn't have the cover. It doesn't have a parental advisory sticker, which is funny.
That's weird.
Which I don't think a lot of Earache stuff or metal stuff really bothers. It's just like mainstream shit.
They're just looking at it probably like, why bother? You know,
yeah,
like
the band's Carcass. Okay, that's
if
enough.
A band can't like, or if a parent can't figure it out from like looking at the cover of JFK's blown head, you know, then they're a bad parent anyways. So, but any final thoughts on Swansong before we kind of talk about the Swansong session tunes, which are kind of rare, I guess.
I don't know. I mean, it still holds up well for me. It's not. I don't have any kind of like bad feelings or bad blood toward the band for putting this record out. I think if they would have not put it out, they would have had to find basically an unblemished career. And this is kind of
this puts in some people's eyes question mark.
Yeah, it's like, well, if they would have just not put that last record out, they would have had a perfect career.
Yeah,
and I really don't mind the warts and all aspects of it's Swansong.
It's kind of like with some of that mid era Paradise Lost, which has its charms and appeals and things like that.
But they go way off the tracks.
Oh, for sure. But you even get into and appreciate some of the stuff from Host and things like that. I like Host.
There's no Paradise Lost record I don't like some aspect of.
But it's again, it can be very challenging. I don't think a lot of fans were willing to go the same pace of evolution.
I mean, most people want their band. I mean, I think there's rare exceptions, but I mean, even Radiohead really hasn't stretched that far compared to like some of these metal bands.
Yeah,
have.
Well, especially since like OK Computer and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that's kind of created the template for them.
Yeah, there hasn't been that kind of huge disparity in what they actually do. So I think metal bands probably have, or especially extreme metal bands, have the least amount of latitude, but they have the most amount of potential to change.
Yeah. And the British bands were notorious in this era. That's one other thing we should kind of mention. I mean, this
Cathedral. Everybody on Earache was just like, "What the fuck is going on?"
Yeah, this is part of that. The Paradise
Brutal
Lost.
Truth.
Yeah, even Brutal Truth. Anathema was really Morphine. My Dying Bride put out the 34%. I mean, it was a really experimental era for some reason, and maybe it's just extreme metal had kind of run its course, and Carcass was part of that original run of extreme metal. And
these are people in their mid-20s now. It's like when you start doing something. How many things do you do now that you did when you were 15 and still enjoy them as much?
Yeah,
it's without having other things,
sure,
in your creative endeavors
them.
or whatever. Yeah.
So one of the reasons, like we said, why we want to shine a spotlight on this era is, maybe some of you who initially dismissed this record can, hear a show like this and kind of go, it's not as bad as I remember it being. I kind of dismissed this and kind of moved on. But
I think last year, Earache actually put out really nice.
It was in the last couple of years, yeah.
They basically reissued all the Carcass records on double. What do you call them? Digipacks.
Yep.
With like the bonus DVDs that eventually becomes like an hour and a half documentary or whatever.
Yeah.
Which I would definitely suggest going out and
just for the documentary alone. Yeah. It's pretty cool.
Which you can probably find on YouTube, but help a brother out and buy some stuff.
Exactly. But the Swansong sessions that you get 5 tunes from on the Wake Up and Smell the Carcass, I mentioned one of them that we decided not to play. Frankly, it's not like a good song, really. It's not like, it's probably the weakest of the 5 songs, but it's interesting in terms of its title, which is I Told You So, Corporate Rock Really Sucks. And one of the things that was going on here is that, with this whole Earache Columbia thing that a lot of people probably have heard parts of the story about, this idea of trying to make Carcass into the next Metallica or the next Megadeth or something. There's the famous story that Columbia wanted Jeff Walker to take voice lessons so he could learn to sing better.
Yeah.
There's all these things that were happening, and it just, a song like I Told You So, Corporate Rock Really Sucks is like the ultimate statement of like lashing out,
and when you think about it from a logical standpoint, why the hell would Columbia? Okay, this is really interesting music that's happening right now.
Let's sign it, and then let's make it into something bland.
That makes no sense whatsoever. The band is Carcass. They're not going to sell 1 million records.
Yeah,
they're very niche. They have an incredibly voracious fan base, but it makes no sense that you want to try to make it more accessible.
Now, I can't remember. It's been a few years since I've read Choosing Death when Albert talks about the whole Columbia kind of movement. Was there like a change in leadership at Columbia that took place after the signing of Godflesh, Napalm?
I think after that initial run of 5 or 6 records that they put out, I think that one of the A&R guys or one of the guys basically that was responsible for the deal, I think he left.
And then they were kind of on their own.
And then I think most of the bands were like, well, fuck this, we're just going to go back to whatever. And I think Carcass was one of the few that was still on. I think they were basically in the process of recording that record as this guy was like on the outs or whatever happened. And then they basically just got, run over the bus.
Just fell apart. Yeah. So it's a crazy story, and a song like that kind of really gets at it. But 2 songs that we are going to play that maybe you're less familiar with if you don't have access or haven't heard Wake Up and Smell the Carcass are Emotional Flatline and Blood Splattered Banner. And these are 2, I guess, of the heavier tunes that you hear on the record. And Emotional Flatline has some pretty cool riffs going on. It's got the part in the middle where it has like almost that Cathedral breakdown with like the
cowbell stuff.
The cowbell kind of.
The cowbell is something that you start hearing a little bit in Swansong that really goes heavy and
it creeps into Blackstar a little bit. And then Blood Splattered Banner. This is probably the heaviest tune of these sessions in a way, and it might even be heavier than a lot of the stuff that was actually showed up on Swansong.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded like something that would have been on the Heartwork EP.
Yeah, and maybe they were like going for a different aesthetic in a way, like let's keep Swansong a little cleaner, and I don't know if that was the record company making those choices at the end or how much,
I think it was just infighting.
Carcass, yeah, I mean,
because I think they were sick to death of being this kind of band. Like they wanted to do something different.
Yeah. So. And they will. So this is the final statement of Carcass here with Emotional Flatline and Blood Splattered Banner, and then we're going to transition into a trio of tunes from Blackstar, and we'll talk a little bit more about Blackstar and kind of what you're hearing here. But be prepared; it might be a little bit shocking. So it's going to go from Emotional Flatline, Blood Splattered Banner into Sound of Silence, one of Mark's favorites, Rock and Roll Circus. And if you're still listening after Rock and Roll Circus...
It's not a Wasp cover either.
No, it's not. It's not the Electric Circus or the Rock and Roll Show. But yeah, then it's going to go into a cover song called The Girl Who Lives on Heaven Hill. And we'll talk a lot about Blackstar when we come back. So enjoy. Girl Lives on Heaven Hill, Rock and Roll Circus, Sound of Silence, and blood splattered banner in Emotional Flatline to kind of start things off. So
it's a little Husker Du there.
Yeah. Grant Hart, penned song from Husker Du's New Day Rising from 1985. But The Girl Lives on Heaven Hill. This was really the song from Blackstar I was the most familiar with for a long time. And oddly enough, it's because so many people slagged Blackstar, including Chris, who was a big influence on me, and also used to partner with Mark on the Requiem, which is our namesake. And Chris I was closer to when I was younger, because Chris and Mark, you guys didn't kind of split and you went your separate ways, and I kind of knew Chris through the record store, and so that was my anchor. And he really, really knocked this record to the point where I just didn't listen to it for years. Like, I just avoided it, and then time goes on. It's 2003, 2004. I mean, who's talking about Blackstar anymore, where you'd be like, oh, I need to really
Funny
get
thing,
a hold
it's been
of this.
reissued 3 times.
Yeah, it is a weird thing. But the reason I had this cover song, this Husker Du, is it was on the Peaceville 10 record, which had a bunch of cool covers.
Which I think that was only available as like some kind of like, if you bought stuff from Peaceville, you got it, right?
That's how I got it. Sold through the Peaceville mail order. So it's got other cool covers and stuff on there from Bride and Anathema and stuff. But
Nancy Sinatra, right? Some Velvet Morning.
And Portishead Roads, which is pretty cool. But and it's a fun tune, and you can hear those punk roots in there, and those sort of like all the roots that this is stuff that inspired Jeff Walker and Bill Steer and Ken Owen when they started Carcass, and when he was they came out of
came out of the hardcore punk.
Yeah, Bill Steer was in Napalm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so none of this should be surprising that they would have appreciated a band like Husker Du that was like a faster punk band, punk, indie, whatever you want to call Husker Du.
I think they started out hardcore punk, scene in the early 80s, but I mean, it's and then they definitely put their hard rock, heavy metal spin on it, where they basically, for the riff, throwing like 15 pinch harmonics. But
it's catchy as hell. It's a catchy tune. But
and that's actually kind of like, I think, Jeff Walker's ideal singing range, like the cadence and everything is like perfect.
And it's catchy, and I think it's because it fits right into that range of Walker. And one of the things that you start to hear on these songs is especially, that Amok, Love and Death EP Sentence kind of era of
very
sound,
pop sensibilities to the vocal
Pyogenesis is another band we threw in that's kind of never been great at singing, but they make
they have
it
their own
work.
charm.
But tell us about Rock and Roll Circus and Sound of Silence there.
Well, Rock and Roll Circus I wanted to throw on purely because it's probably the most unlike anything you've heard on by Carcass.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's they have a breakdown about halfway through the song where it's just kind of like some guitar noodling and then like some saxophones coming in.
Yeah. Well,
what the hell's going on here?
You got the cowbell going on in that song as well.
Yeah. And it's just kind of and just the name itself is just kind of retarded. And I think that was kind of they were just having fun.
Yeah.
And I can kind of see I saw that then, and a lot of people just hated the record, but a lot of people didn't care and just enjoyed it for being a solid like hard rock record.
Yeah.
So
I think it's so, in some ways I was so open-minded because I wasn't tainted by the history of some bands. But at another point, being young and in your teenage years, I was also sort of like inhibited to like, to jump out on my own and find, if like everybody I was hanging out with said, this sucks, I wasn't like really gonna like spend my time trying to get into it because there's no incentive.
Yeah, you didn't have the historical backing to say like, well, this is, trace these things back. People would just be like, well, you're a charlatan, you don't know what you're talking about in music,
Or I wasn't bold enough to like, want to listen to music that none of my friends were gonna want to listen to. It's kind of sad to say that.
Well, it's just the kind of something you do as you mature, I think.
Sure. And as you get older, you just start giving a crap about what
you like. You don't listen to stuff just to make your record collection look better.
Yeah, exactly. But Rock and Roll Circus, and now that I've listened to this record, it's a great record. It's a great rock record.
Yeah.
And Sound of Silence is a pretty killer tune. And like you said, a sound like Sound of Silence could really fit in with Swansong, or even there's moments of it that have some Heartwork-esque catchiness to it, but it's just a lighter version,
and it's less
Walker singing is different.
It's not as refined and tight and crisp as Heartwork was, for sure. It's not like Stop on a Dime stuff. It's just more jammy.
Yeah.
Although I hate using that word because people think you're talking about like Dave Matthews or Fish, but it's a little bit more. It's a little bit more loose in approach.
Yeah, it's just more open.
And even some of the songs have like some fuck ups beforehand, and they just like play right on through.
Yeah. It's a neat record, and definitely one. And the name of the record, we should kind of say, is Barbed Wire Soul, and it was put out by Metal Blade. And
it was actually put out by Peaceful.
Oh, was it? And
then it was licensed by Metal Blade.
My reissue is Metal Blade only, and I have, of course, Blackstar Rising, which so if you're looking for it, you might not find it under Blackstar. But
actually, I think you'd be hard. If any major larger city, you're probably going to find this used at a record store.
Yeah,
I've found many copies, and I always feel like I should buy it just to give to somebody anytime I see it. But I mean, the one that you picked up, I think, was from a record store in Ann Arbor.
It definitely was.
It had been sitting there for
years.
I'd lived in Ann Arbor for 5 years, and it was there the whole time.
Yeah, and I was kind of like, oh, you know what? I think I just had to burn a Blackstar or something, or MP3s of it. I was like, why don't I just buy this?
It's really, like $3 or $5 or something.
Totally worth it. I'm sure you can find it on our Amazon Marketplace for like $1.50. You know. And definitely worth.
Well, there's a reissue that came out a couple years ago that has all the stuff we talked about on the Peaceville 10 comp, and then like it's got like 15 to 18 bonus tracks, so like demo versions. And if you're really into it, if you like what you hear here, I'm sure you can get it for $5 or $6.
And a lot of covers and different things too, which is cool. So. But so Blackstar. I mean, there's not a lot to say about it because it's this sort of one and done kind of thing, and there's not much reflection upon it. Both by the critics, not really by the band members themselves. I mean, Walker and Carlos and Ken kind of go their separate ways for a while, and Griff. What is Griff doing these days? Anything?
He's actually he's touring. He's a touring bassist with someone fairly popular.
Oh, really? Okay.
But not that I even know who they are. But according to Wikipedia entry, like he's some like I guess, I don't know what kind of musician he is either, but he's like this very successful touring musician.
Hey,
so
good for him.
Adult contemporary, whatever. He's a musician. He's making money doing it. More power to him.
And of course, some of you may have heard that Carcass, kind of got back together and did a little reunion kind of.
And they're still doing, some festival arenas and stuff. And
so good for them,
Just, I don't think they need to make another record. I think they've got so much good stuff in the back catalog that that's always a mistake. And At the Gates was kind of the picture perfect, reunion thing.
Yep.
Like, okay, we're gonna do a live record. That makes sense.
And done.
Bye. We're out of here. I'm gonna go do 50 other bands. See ya.
Hey, maybe they can. I mean, they could do a touring record for each album. They could do the Swansong tour. They could do the Heartwork tour. I don't think
people would be happy with that at all.
The Swansong tour.
Although, didn't they play a Swansong?
I think they did.
Song when we saw them?
Yeah, I can't remember what. It might have been Keep on Riding. I think it was Keep on Riding.
Okay. Yeah, I think they did.
But,
But it was like across the board, and everybody was so fucking stoked just to see them play.
Yeah. Hey.
Like, it had been...
and I bet
16 years since I saw them.
And I bet people, who even hated Swansong back then, once you get some distance from this, it's not
They're probably like, what album was that on?
Yeah, well, it's not even that. Yeah, it blends in really well. But the other thing is that it probably just becomes like, hey, we haven't had any new Carcass in 15 years, so I'm going to actually listen to Swansong a little bit deeper. It's like you can bitch and moan when it comes out, but then you realize that's it. That's the last legacy you get from Carcass. So you better soak up whatever you can out of that record. And there's a lot of really great moments on it. There's some songs that are fairly kind of boring. I skip past. It's not as
there's some very cliche metal or rock riffs, I guess, like stuff that Eric Clapton would have created 40 years previously or something. Yeah.
And there's definitely Blackstar's very cliche in that too. I mean but that's.
But I don't think they're not trying to be anything other than what they are.
Nope. They're just trying to kind of have fun with it. So. But we've got a couple tunes to sort of close things out tonight. Game Over, which is the album opener, and then Give Up the Ghost. Again,
I think two of the stronger songs on the album, actually.
Yeah, I think Give Up the Ghost is the one where I notice a lot of the Zakk Wylde-isms, the pinch harmonic kind of stuff all over the place. And then Game Over has a really kind of hilarious beginning. It's the perfect... if we were doing a Blackstar show, it would be the show opener for sure. Yeah. So I figured it's a good opener for the final set of music. But... yeah, I don't know. Let us know. I bet there's a lot of you out there listening to this who either dismiss this era or never really heard it. So, shoot us some feedback at requiempodcast@gmail.com or drop us a line on Facebook. Mark and Jason.
Leave us star reviews on iTunes. It's always helpful. We've got a couple new ones recently. We actually we don't mention it very much, but we love donations because this thing costs money for hosting costs and all that kind of stuff. And we just got a few generous donations that are actually helping to mail out the contest winner prizes.
Yeah, so congratulations to the contest winners.
I'm not going to mention them on exactly who they are. I've emailed them, so I don't think it's necessarily put their name up if they don't want it or whatever. Yeah. But we had two winners. One won the Decibel Prize. Another person has won a huge pile of CDs from Earache and Season of Mist, and there's some good stuff in there. So
yeah, we're going to continue to do stuff like that. Not necessarily for the 100th episode, but just for general kind of contests and stuff to kind of hopefully
we've had really good feedback on that so far.
And reach out to you guys a little bit and get more interaction and stuff because we do listen and pay attention to some of the suggestions that you're making and kind of consider where we want to go with that stuff. So
and I was just reading on iTunes tonight. Somebody's like, "Man, it'd be great if you did a Neurosis show before episode 200." Done and done.
Done and done. Happened. Yeah, and then we've been bantering around with doing some of the older thrash stuff like Overkill and Exodus, and some people have kind of mentioned that, and definitely somebody out there has put out the idea of an unanimated show, and I bet if
we have to get away from Sweden for a while. We'd love to do it.
Yeah, we're gonna go on a detour for a while from Sweden, but we'll come back, y'all. Y'all here?
That's where we always come back to.
But to close things out, we got Game Over and Give Up the Ghost, and this is from the Blackstar Barbed Wire Soul, which is a record you can find for 52 cents on Amazon.com. So for Requiem Metal Podcast, I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.
Please clear So you don't know what you've got until it's gone. Can't change my tune, but it sure as hell can change the song. And you know the show must go on. How long? Yeah, how long? Tell me how long. You don't know what you've got until it's gone. Can't change my tune, but it sure as hell can change the song. And you know the show must go on. How long? Yeah, how long? You'll never know just what you had. I tell myself that there's never any going back. Ain't no time for feelings, I let go. Just let go, let it go. Kiss this goodbye. Just let go, let it go. Giving up the what is to come, I need to go. Ripping the seeds that someone else has sown. Nothing is sacred, and I should know, I know. Yeah, I know. You'll never know just what you had. I tell myself that there's never any going back. Ain't no time for feelings, I let go. Let it go, just let it go. Kiss this goodbye. Just let go, let it go. Giving up the ghost. Kiss this goodbye. Just let go.